Welcome to Eye of the Storm. Never forget that we are the storm because we're standing together organizing a revolutionary movement. I have a very special guest with me today, Christopher Griffis. Thank you for joining us, Christopher.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, I'm looking forward to sharing your story and all that you have been through. And so before we get into the mix and before I fully introduce you, I'm going to bring our Heavenly Father into the mix because I find that's paramount to what we're going through. So dear Heavenly Father, we come before you now. And as always, I'm so thankful for this opportunity to come before the people. Father, I thank you so much for Christopher and his willingness to share his story, Father, so that we can bring change to this nation and to the world around us by exposing all of the darkness and the evils that are being perpetrated upon the people and the children of this nation and of the world as well, Father. And so I ask that you just put a hedge of protection around him, guide him through all of his trials that he is going through, Father, and shine a light on his path so he knows exactly which direction to go. And may you lead him through that, Father, and may you lead all of us through this darkness, and may we walk in your light so that we can navigate this realm. I thank you for all those that are listening and those that aren't. May you just bless us and guide us through this time, and may those listening be the ones that need to hear this, Father. In your precious name, Jesus, amen.
And I thank you for that.
Yes. So let me tell our audience a little bit about you. So Christopher is a national public speaker, human rights advocate, executive director of We the People Advocates at Oceanside, California, former board of directors at the Community Partnership for the Protection of Children at Jacksonville, co-founder of Florida's Youth Shine Youth Advisory Council, a former foster child, torture survivor, a targeted individual, and a loving father of 5 children kidnapped through the judicial corruption. That's a lot. It's a lot to unpack. And so thank you for being willing to share your story, because I think it's so important to share these things, because not a lot of people are aware of what actually happens in the system and with these type of things. So I'm really excited to have you here. And I love your flag like that. Tell me what you were saying before we got on about why it's like that.
Well, as far as this flag goes, the flag being upside down is a sign that we are a nation in distress. And right now in the United States of America, we are most certainly a nation in distress, because we have got mass incarceration that is out of this world, and children being stolen from their parents by judges on a ridiculously massive scale. If your property and if your family and your livelihood is in jeopardy, your flag should be upside down, because you recognize that we are a nation in distress.
Amen. That's right. And I agree with that. I usually fly my flag upside down when I have it. So it's important to have the call signs of what's happening. But tell me about your story about starting with being in the foster care system and a torture survivor, and then we can get into the other things.
Absolutely. So, to begin with, in my young childhood, I was a victim of torture. There was all sorts of violent torture, and using ropes and wooden boards, zip ties, hair being ripped out, beatings on a regular basis, and things of that nature. And I repeatedly made reports to DCF and to the people at my schools about these instances that were happening that were ultimately putting my life in jeopardy. The evidence was all there. I had bruises like crazy and of varying degrees. But the Department of Children and Families failed to intervene in a situation where a child most certainly needed an intervention. And after dealing with that for years, ultimately, it was abandonment that got me into foster care. I went into foster care and realized quickly that what they were doing is they were taking kids out of a situation that may or may not be bad, and they put them into a situation that most certainly is bad. And that's what I realized going into foster care. After over 30 homes, I was in homes where there were mentally handicapped children being physically beaten. There were homes where there were holes in the walls and roach infestations. And at nearly all of the homes, the children were treated as though they were nothing more than a head and a paycheck for somebody's Mercedes-Benz or mortgage or early retirement, but most certainly not treated like a member of the family. And as far as care goes, there was very little of it. There were many times when I was hungry, and many times when I was just out on the street wandering with nowhere to go because I was kicked out of the house for the day and had to figure out my own way to feed myself, my own way to keep myself safe and sheltered throughout the day. And this was a common practice in foster care. So at 16 years old, I was uh, I, I was in a situation at school. They had me in a program called the Severely Emotionally Disturbed. Now, mind you, a couple of years before, I was accepted into the Stanton International Baccalaureate program, where I would have been able to take my pick of Ivy League schools with a scholarship at the end of high school. But instead, I was forced to be in the Severely Emotionally Disturbed program. And in that program, there was no education. You don't even get a real high school diploma. So at 16 years old, the day after I turned 16, I dropped out, signed up for the GED test, and passed with flying colors as one of the top scorers ever. After that happened, and it was within a couple of months, I was dealing with a few situations. And one of them was that I had gotten a phone call from another advocate, a child rights advocate, who had been established and was at the time very much the poster child for foster care. And he called me up and he invited me over to a meeting of the board of directors at the Community Partnership for the Protection of Children. And I accepted. I went over to the meeting, and at the board meeting, I was unanimously voted onto the board of directors. So at 16 years old with a GED, I was a nonprofit executive. The people at that nonprofit, they put a lot of time, effort, and money into me in order to grow my skills as a speaker, as a public figure. They put me into leadership, mentorship, business starting and management programs, all sorts of things so that they could build me up. And as mentors, these women were absolutely wonderful mentors to show me that love does still exist in this world and that good people do still exist, as it was something that I really thought just wasn't possible anymore until I met them. And so after a few years of being with this nonprofit organization, during that time, I started shutting down foster homes that were bad. And I went back to those foster homes where there was the abuse and the rat infestations and roach infestations and the ones where children were being hurt, and I had them shut down. I was successful at getting those homes shut down. I also was spotted by a nonprofit organization in South Florida called Florida's Children First. And Florida's Children First had me come on, and I helped them to build and help find the Florida's Youth Shine Youth Advocacy Board. And what that did is it gave the children who are coming out of foster care an opportunity and a voice in order to make legislative changes within the foster care system in the state of Florida, which it has done and it does do. And we were able to successfully get some legislation passed at the time that took the locks off of the refrigerators and the cabinets in the foster homes, that created a system of checks and balances where when a child left the foster home, they were given an exit interview, and there was a position created for those exit interviews to be read. And there was somebody with the opportunity and the information to be able to enforce any type of rights violations or investigate any abuse claims that are made by the children who are coming out of these foster homes. And it was supposed to improve those lives. It was supposed to increase college education and increase the free education for them so that these kids coming out would be able to get a college education without having to pay for it, and also be able to be paid while they're getting that college education. And all these things were great. It was great legislation that passed unanimously. I went and met the governor of Florida, who was Jeb Bush at the time. There's a picture somewhere in the archives of me with my hands on his shoulders while he's signing the legislation into law. And so that was great work. But what it did is ultimately I became a focus. Okay, so my face was focused and out there. Senator Marco Rubio asked me to be on his staff, gave me an offering to be his staffer. This was when he was the Speaker-elect of the House of Representatives in Florida. And I declined the position because I was working on my advocacy goals and my own missions. And but shortly after I declined that, I started becoming a target for official oppression in my hometown. And the nonprofit organization that I was working with, the Community Partnership for the Protection of Children, was targeted by a state-funded CBC, a community-based care provider called Florida Children's First. Florida, no, not Florida. I'm sorry. It was a Florida, so FSS. I can't remember what that acronym is for, but FSS had targeted the community partnership because community partnership was doing foster care prevention, and foster care prevention goes against the policies of our states of trafficking children. And they don't want you to prevent foster care. They need more kids in foster care because that's how they make their money. And so the community partnership was doing foster care prevention and would provide any service necessary or anything at all that we could do in order to keep a child with their parents. So if your light bill was due and you were losing your electricity and that was going to cost you, or if you had a drug addiction problem, or if you didn't have somebody to watch your child so you could go to work, we would do anything to keep a child from having to go into foster care. And that directly was against the motives and goals of the state of Florida and these community-based care providers. And so they wanted our grant. They wanted to take away our funding because they knew that taking away our funding was a way to shut us down. And they managed to very maliciously get our grant funding because our grant required that any local CBCs, that we had to have a working relationship with them in order to get our grant, to maintain our grant. And they refused to work with us whatsoever. Our organization shut down. We continued to volunteer for about a year. And then while we were trying to seek new funding, and that organization got our grant, it was a nasty move. The CEO of this organization collecting a six-figure salary off of the trafficking of children. It's not something I'm supportive of whatsoever, but it's something that's happening throughout this entire country. Is that in these private organizations, these alleged nonprofit organizations who are contracted with the states in order to run foster care, these private corporations have CEOs that are making six figures, and these six-figure earners are in the business of trafficking children, and they have a vested interest in having more and more children. So none of us are safe in the United States under these policies, and our children are not safe under these policies because at any moment in time, and for any reason, even a rumor or a lie, your child can be snatched away from you and your home. You can have police officers knocking on your door and demanding that your child be taken to them, or they'll come to the schools and remove children off of school buses and out of their schools and the public schools. It's a common practice in sight. They're stealing children, babies, right out of the hospital. With our current Health and Human Services is the oversight over the CDC, which we know has been lying to us about what things are healthy and what things are not. They're over the FDA, which has also been lying to us about what's healthy and what's not. They're over the entire foster care system throughout the United States. They're over the peonage slavery system of child support. They're over a lot of these things that are subversive to our rights and our freedoms. And they are in the business, and they assist in slavery efforts. They're also over the human trafficking hotline. So victims of human trafficking who are being trafficked through these systems do not have anywhere to turn because there is nowhere else to turn to but the one human trafficking hotline run by an agency that is trafficking human beings. So you're not going to get any remedy by calling the human trafficking hotline. And that's something that a lot of these foster children run into and realize, is that when they go and call these hotlines to try and get help because they're being trafficked, they get no help because the agency trafficking them is also running that hotline. And that's another thing that we have to recognize. Right. And so, there's a vested interest in a business of stealing children away from their parents, and it's being perpetrated collectively by several organizations, private industries, and they've created this business of slavery. And we can trace it all back in history, but it comes down to these three entities at the top of the food chain that are really putting this all into place. And those are the Democratic and Republican Party. And I say that because the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, the Democrats support the Republicans and the Republicans support the Democrats. Okay. And if you go back into the history of the United States, the Democratic Party used to be called the Democratic Republican Party. And the Republican Party did not exist until a couple of years after the Democratic Republican Party changed their name to the Democratic Party. This is all in your American history. So the Democratic Party went from Democratic Republican to Democratic, and then a few years later, the Republican Party was founded. The Democratic and Republican parties are the same. are and always have been. And that deception that they are two different factions has been deceiving many, many people for over 100 years, over 150 years. We've been dealing with this deception. All right. So that entity, the Democratic Republican Party, is one of them. The blue wall of silence. And some people may not know what that is, but the blue wall of silence is something you can look up. It's on Wikipedia. It's also called the blue shield. And the blue wall of silence is that secret code amongst officers that they will not report each other's crimes. And it also is that protection that keeps public officials from being arrested. The blue wall of silence protects the police, and it protects public officials who commit crimes against we the people. The blue wall of silence is the immunity that exists. It's the reason why in my hometown of St. Augustine, Florida, why an officer was able to murder his girlfriend and get away with it. And every law enforcement agency backed up the lie. The blue wall of silence is how Senator Nancy Schaefer, who was murdered in her home next to her husband, who was also murdered in the home. It's the reason why they were able to be murdered for exposing corruption and child trafficking without any consequence, and with the false ruling that it was a murder-suicide, just like with Michelle O'Connell, that was considered a suicide. When people who expose corruption and when people who are dealing with corruption end up being victims of corrupt players, because of the blue wall of silence, there's never justice for the victim.
Right.
And so we have to recognize that is another one of our enemies. And then the third enemy, which it may be the biggest one of all, is the bar associations.
Mm-hmm.
The bar associations make up 0.4% of our population. 0.4% are lawyers who are able to practice law in the United States. But nearly every person at some point in their lives has some sort of interaction with the law and has to have, either higher representation or go into a courtroom without representation. And this is what we can recognize, is that when you walk into a courtroom, you have a bar association member as a judge presiding over your case. You have a bar association member as your attorney sometimes, and you have a bar association member as your prosecutor. And so when you have that situation, it's a system that is completely stacked against the people. And that's why we have 1.8 million people in the United States currently incarcerated. Because when you walk into a courtroom, we are not walking into courts of law. We're walking into crime scenes where people's rights are violated for the purposes of generating revenue and slaves for the states of the United States. And this particular system of slavery, this system of 1.8 million people being incarcerated, started in 1865 when the 13th Amendment was ratified into the Constitution of the United States. And the 13th Amendment made slavery legal as long as it was punishment for a crime, which ultimately put every single one of the states in the business of slavery and put the bar associations in the business of enforcing that slavery. These Democrats and Republicans work together to create statutes, codes, and ordinances that violate our rights so that they could generate that slave base, generate that slave workforce for the states. And so these statutes, codes, and ordinances that they're writing, if you look at them, they violate some of our basic inalienable rights. They enforce slavery, which is against the law. They enforce all sorts of things that go against the betterment of humanity. And that in itself is a crime. And so that's how the Democratic Party and the Republican Party work together. They ratified the 13th Amendment into our Constitution. And then after they ratified it, they created all of the statutes, codes, and ordinances that violate our rights so that they can create a slave workforce. And it is not disputed in Congress that we have a slave workforce. It is not disputed that our government has been weaponized against us. In our Congress right now, there is a special committee on the weaponization of the government. There is a committee on that because the government has been weaponized against us. There would not need to be a committee on the weaponization of government if it was not actively weaponized against us. And incarcerating 1.8 million people, 50,000 parents at any given time, on any given day, are incarcerated for not paying child support payments. Child support that was never intended for the child in the first place. Right. And its inception, child support back in 1975, was to reimburse the government for expenses of welfare when a parent abandons the family. But what's happening is they've turned Title 4D, this Title 4D Act, through the Deadbeat Parents Punishment Act that Bill Clinton signed into law in 1998. they turned it into a system of peonage slavery, which is debt slavery. And they've turned it into a system of debt slavery, where parents are removed from their children's lives without any good reason in courts that are in they're confidential, and confidentiality that protects the wrong person and the wrong people. And in these confidential courtrooms, due process of law is violated so that they can entice and coerce people into peonage slavery. They lie to people, they steal their children, kidnap their children, and put them into slavery. And that's a situation that I'm dealing with right now. As it stands right now, I have 5 beautiful babies and I love them dearly. And I have not seen my babies or talked to them in a very long time. But what they've done is, through the courts, through the Bar Association, these Bar Association members and their corruption, and the corruption is on its face. But through that corruption, what they've done is they have deleted me from my children's lives, which is something that they do to millions of parents. And then they put me on what they call child support, which is, again, not for the benefit of the child. Now, this child support program is a $50 billion industry of debt slavery in the United States of America. It's a huge business ever since the Deadbeat Parents Punishment Act went in, and that was instituted in '98. So this $50 billion industry includes government contractors and private corporations who enforce and seek out these parents who don't pay, probably because they can't. Oftentimes they can't, or morally they don't want to, because they're being denied any contact with their child, and in exchange for that inequity, they are forced to pay, forced to turn into a pay rent instead of a parent. And that is it's an injustice to humanity, because what we know is that children who come from homes that are broken are more likely to be dysfunctional as adults. And we know that children who come from these broken homes where they're missing a parent in their life are more likely to wind up in the prisons and in mental institutions and dealing with severe anxiety. They're a weaker human being who is more easily susceptible to manipulation and exploitation. That's what it is. And ultimately, if a judge can destroy a child's childhood, they can ruin a child's childhood, they know that, statistically speaking, it'll ultimately benefit the Bar Association, because then that child will end up probably going into DJJ, or maybe end up as an adult who has some sort of substance abuse issue, and ends up in and out of jail, things like that. But it's a more vulnerable adult. And so they know that by removing a parent, they have an interest. They actually benefit from doing that, from hurting a child by removing a parent. And then on top of that, they also get direct payment, because they're incentivized to enforce Title 40 programs. The federal government, through the Deadbeat Parents Punishment Act, made it so that the states are reimbursed $2 for every $3 they allege to spend on child support collection efforts. That said, everybody's getting paid off of this except for the people, and it hurts the children in the long run, and it hurts our society as a whole. And then we've got the Department of Children and Families, who, while trafficking children, are also doing the same thing through a different Title IV program and charging child support to parents whose children were kidnapped and put into foster care. Parents whose rights were violated in these courts, parents whose children were taken unjustly and without any cause, children who were not in any danger before but are in danger now, and children who ultimately, on a massive scale, are being trafficked for sex, labor, medical science, and federal funding. And that is what we know. That is a fact. The children who are going into foster care are being subjected to sex, labor, medical, and all these forms of slavery. It's for the benefits of federal funding. And so, in other words, we, the people of the United States of America, are paying our government to hire people to violate our rights and enslave us and our children. I'm not okay with that. I didn't agree to that. I don't think you agree to that, or
not at all.
No, but this is what the fact of the matter is. This is our current state of affairs in the United States of America. And then we also know that while they're enslaving the rest of us, all of us in the United States, through stealing our children, mass incarceration, and then through debt, by enacting the Federal Reserve Act, which we know is one, we've had multiple presidents who have spoken against central banking. We've banned and outlawed central banking repeatedly in this country, but these dirty bankers keep getting their hands on our country and enslaving us through central banking. So that 1913 Federal Reserve Act put our entire country into slavery through debt. But
Right.
so we're all living in these situations of slavery of one form or another, whether it's, the fact that you don't own your own home because you always have to pay taxes on it because you're
Right.
living in debt and have to work to pay for the basic necessities of life, and your life slips away from you because you spend all your time working for those basic needs. Again, another form of slavery, or whether your children are being stolen. The fact is that we're all living in systems of slavery that are being funded by our government, and we are paying these people really good salaries and giving them great benefits in order to enslave us. And I'm not okay with that. I'm not keen on it. I think that we all need to stand up and say, no, we do not consent to slavery in any form or fashion. And we have got to abolish slavery in all forms for the sake of the future of humanity.
Absolutely. And the funny thing is that they use slavery in a different way. We've done this, we've done that, but they're not, it's almost to smooth over and ignore the fact that it's still happening, that it's happening on an even more massive scale than anybody could really imagine. And it's something that I like to talk about too, because it's so important. In fact, what I was saying to you before we got on is even talking about the migrant children that come across the border. They're having more of an influx of children to do this with, which is very disturbing because they act like they're doing it for humanity. We're reuniting children with their families. And that is not the goal of these organizations at all. Like you said, it's all for profit, and it's to get more money and have more bodies to be able to do that with. And then I think about all the things that they're doing in schools with children and sexualizing them, wanting them to get, have transgender affirming care and things like that. And then they'll take the parents or take the children away from the parents if they don't agree with it. So they have many avenues that they use in order to do this. And I feel like, do you feel like there's been an increase in that over the last several years? Like as time has gone on, it's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger.
I totally agree that this is a situation that has gotten entirely out of hand. If there's one child who is being sex trafficked, being stolen from their parents to be medically castrated, if there is one adult even who is in a system of slavery and being enslaved, then I am enslaved too, because we are all one people.
Right.
Okay, if there is something some injustice that's happening to one, it's happening to all of us. And you may not be a victim of it currently in your own mindset, but if you start thinking about it, okay, you don't own your own home.
Right.
Okay, a slave is a person who cannot own property. All right. You don't own your home. And how do I say that? Because as soon as you stop paying your taxes, you realize who really owns your home. You do not own your car, because as soon as they say that you don't have a driver's license anymore, or as soon as you don't pay them for your license plate, as soon as you don't pay some private corporation for insurance and you get caught, they will steal your car. So it's never yours in the first place. You're just borrowing. You pay for an interest in it. You pay for an interest in your home. You pay for an interest in your car. You have an interest in your children. You have an interest in yourself, but you do not own you. Your children are not yours. Your car, your home, nothing that you have is yours, because these corrupt government actors can come into your life and steal anything that you have at any point in time. And you will not get due process of law, because in these courts, they are committing piracy. They are committing piracy. When you walk into these courts, when you're walking into these crime scenes that they call courtrooms, your rights are going to be violated and somebody is going to steal something from you. And that's so that this 0.4% of the population, these bar association members, can continue to have mansions and yachts and put their kids through college paid for. They can have generational wealth and prosperity for their families. And they don't care that they're doing it at the expense of the American public. And that is the evil that we're battling. We're battling a greedy evil that wants to steal from us. And as much as they can steal from us, they will. And we have this greedy system of bar association members who are taking advantage of us, who are not trained in law. We go to
Right.
school, we spend 18 years, or not 18 years, we spend 18 years of our lives growing up before we get out of high school. We spend 13 of those years in school. And what do they teach us at the school? Do they teach us about the laws that we're subjected to when we step out of this? We turn 18, we step out of school, the laws we're subjected to? No, they don't tell
No.
us about the laws. Do they tell us about our rights?
No.
About what our rights are, how to enforce them? No, they do not. They leave that education up to the exclusive 0.4% of the population who are already corrupted to and are generationally going into this private association so that they can enslave the masses, so that they can be part of the sovereigns while we are living as the slaves. While they are the gods and we live as the grunts. We put our labor and our effort and our sweat and our tears into working so that we can take money and give it to them, so that they can put lies on pieces of paper and they can perjure records and they can traffic our children and they can traffic us and they can submit us to slavery and they can take away our money, which we worked and sweated for, with a stroke of a pen.
Yes. And it's all intentionally, like they keep the people ignorant of those facts so they can do these nefarious things, right? Because if they taught us those laws, the rights that we have, the Constitution, all of the things that we should be equipped with, that we later on have to go learn on our own, then you would have a totally different society. If they wanted us to be productive, they wouldn't be training you basically and indoctrinating you to become a slave in more ways than you're speaking about, but by going to a job that all you're doing is working just enough so that you can pay for your bills, right? It's not like to have a life where it's like, we should be almost living on farms where we're producing our own goods and not needing to rely on the government, but they have to have us in order to facilitate all of the nefarious agendas that they engage in. And what was I going to say? Even the bar, like, like thinking about even contracts or things like that, they make them so worded so well that you're just like, I don't really understand it. I need to go to somebody who understands it. But it's all it could be very basic if you had some kind of contract, but when you add all of this extra language, then it's allowing for so many things to come in that you're not going to be privy to. It's just like the bills that they bring forward, right? Like it'll be like 5,000 pages of something and they throw in things here and there so that nobody really reads the whole thing. Even the people that are passing it don't really read the whole thing. They may have staff that comes in and kind of gives them a little gist of what are those called, like cliff notes, so that they can kind of have a basic idea. But that's how so many things also, I think, get passed. And then all of a sudden we're like, what? I mean, how did this happen? It's like, well, it was snuck in there and you didn't even know about it. But that's why they need us to stay in this realm of like just ignorance and dumbed down society. That's why I think they even bring in all of the technology and stuff so that we're not paying attention. Like we're a good slave because we're in this prison cell with the door open, but we're just preoccupied with all this stuff and inundated with all the things they give us and then they want us fighting each other as well. So we don't pay attention to them. So we don't see exactly what they're doing. And that's why it's so important to talk about it, to understand, because I don't even think most people, like, we don't need a driver's license and car insurance and a registration, but they make you believe that. Like if you're doing commerce and you're doing business, sure. Right. But people have been bought into all of this stuff that we just kind of go along because we're so afraid of what's going to happen if we don't.
Yeah. Well, as you were saying, you're talking about the complications in reading their documents and reading these laws. So there is a term for that. It's a legal term and it's in the Black's Law Dictionary and it's called legalese.
Right.
And what happens is these bar association members use legalese in order to confuse the public. Legalese is its own language, separate from English. And this legalese language has different meanings for words that you're familiar with. And it does that, and they do that in order to confuse us into accepting the things that they say. All right. And also into deceiving us into believing things that are not true. And that is they coerce us and threaten us into contracts that we would never agree to. It is all just a business of racketeering. It's a massive, massive racketeering scheme of deception. And, as you were saying about the bills and about how they use the legalese in the bills,
Mhm.
the reason why, and this is how you can see the infiltration of the Bar Association into our government. You can see that they've completely taken over our entire judicial branch, because every single judge has to be a member of the Bar Association. So the entire judicial system is slap full of people who are members of a private club that only 4% or 0.4% of the population is a part of. So even no matter how morally correct I am, and no matter how much law that I study, and how fair and just I could possibly be from a bench and an objective point of view, I can never be a judge unless I am a member of the Bar Association, the state bar. And now, what has been recognized in an Arkansas case in 1925 was that the bar associations to require that to practice law, to be required to be a member of the bar association, to practice law, or to be a judge, is a violation of our rights, because law is a common occupation of the people. And to deny the people the opportunity to be able to do a common occupation is a monopoly of that occupation. And so what they've done is the bar associations have monopolized the courts to keep out any non-members, and they are a private organization that is also self-governing. So they have no outside oversight, which means that they can commit all the crimes that they want to. And any time that you try to go to complain about a judge, where do they send you? They send you to a judicial oversight committee. When you have a complaint about an attorney, where do they send you? They send you to the bar association.
Right.
But if you have a complaint that involves a federal crime, if you have a complaint that involves a kidnapping, a violent act, if you have a complaint that involves the theft of a child or being put into slavery, and you go to the police about that, they're going to send you to those oversights. These are
Yeah.
crimes. These police are supposed to arrest crimes, but they will
Right.
not arrest those crimes, because the blue wall of silence protects the bar association members, and so does that self-oversight of these private organizations. It enforces slavery, and it keeps us from being able to get justice. So the Department of Justice is aware. They're fully aware that the situation's occurring with the recurring arrests and prosecutions of the same people over and over again with this weaponization. Because once they have a certain targeted person, and as you were saying, they do it to a small enough number of the population, a small enough percentage of the population, so that the majority percentage of the population stays unaware.
Right.
And so what they do is they have a specific formula for what percentage of the population they can do this to and get away with it. I mean, they're looking at it. But when you look at the actual real numbers of this and the people affected, when you look at the fact that we have over 1 million divorces with parents annually, well, that's a significant impact. But when you look at 330 million people, even over the course of 10 years, you still haven't reached 10% of the population.
Right.
So they do this strategically and target strategically populations who don't have the means to fight back,
Mhm.
populations who are unaware of the law, and so that they can be exploited even better, because the more ignorant you are of the law, the easier you are to exploit.
That's
And
right.
so they specifically target people who, like me, who speak out about the corruption and tell the truth. The truth is their number one enemy. But the biggest enemy that we have right now is the fact that we have so many people living in fear. Victims are living in fear. Victims are hiding in their cubby holes. Oftentimes they become homeless at the end of this. Oftentimes they end up imprisoned. Their voice is taken away. Gag orders are given to a lot of these people who have been victims. Not allowed to talk about it. It's a massive injustice that's happening to people in America being enslaved, and their numbers are growing every day, every single minute. Literally one child every minute is kidnapped by a state agency. And one thing that we also know, more numbers: one dad and one mom, and this is happening throughout the United States. One mom in the United States commits suicide because she's separated from her children every single day. That's one mom in the United States every single day. Roughly 360 suicides a year from moms who are separated from their children. And then we have 50 suicides per day in the United States from dads who are separated from their children. 50 per day. So that's one per state in the union on a daily basis, of parents, dads who have been separated from their children for the profit of the state. and who ultimately die over this. Now, if you think about the amount of production lost in the United States off of the suicides alone, there are millions and millions and millions of dollars in productivity lost for our United States off of the suicides. But if you look at it a different way in the humanitarian aspect, these are 50,000 lives a year of men and roughly 360 to 500 lives of women per year. If there was one, it would be too many. If there was one, it would be too many. There's so much life lost. Children are what, 40% more likely to commit suicide, and if they're in a home where they're removed from a parent. I mean, this is crazy. This is the injustice that's allowed, but we don't call it suicide anymore. I'm trying to get people to stop calling it suicide, because you know what? This isn't suicide. These people didn't kill themselves. These people were murdered. This is murder by proxy. These judges are very aware of the numbers. They're aware of the consequences that these rights violations, this theft of children, this enforcement of slavery ultimately leads to most of our suicides. I mean, I'd say that the majority of the suicides can be accounted to the judiciary. And so, because people feel helpless, they have nowhere to turn. And, so this is murder by proxy. These are malicious acts being done by members of the Bar Association who are trying to profit off of a situation, or are fully aware that their actions could ultimately lead to the death of another person. So these people are committing murder. And,
Yeah.
and that said, they're committing mass murder. This is a massive genocide. They're destroying the American family, and the family is protected under the laws of genocide, or international laws of genocide. So the fact that they're destroying families and targeting families specifically shows that this is a genocide on the American people. It's a massive genocide. And while they may not have gotten your family yet, your family could be next. All it takes is one interaction with a law enforcement agency, with a state governmental agency, or with a judge, to have everything that you've ever worked for stolen away from you, including your life and your family.
Yeah, and thinking about like the suicide like that, I mean, and what better way for them to then keep the children in the system, right? If they've taken their life, it's like, oh, well, okay, that's okay. We'll take care of them. And I think that's the sad thing about the guise of all of this with the children, is that they act like they're helping these children. But like you said, that they're putting them in even worse situations than they were in before. And I have a friend whose children were taken, and her 5-year-old son was put into with foster care, and he was being sexually abused. And so they wound up putting him on psychotropic drugs because he was having such a hard time with it. And it's like, instead of removing him from that situation and saving him from it, they're like, let's just drug him. He's having a hard time. And so people have to understand that, like, this system is not to help or better things. It is literally to destroy children, to destroy families. And it's something that, like, that is unbelievable. You know what I mean? And I mean, I know that you know that. So
the medical industry definitely has their foot in this and their hand in all of this. It's very common. This is what happens. Okay. So you've got Health and Human Services at the top of foster care. So Health and Human Services is monitoring, since the Affordable Care Act was implemented by Barack Obama. A lot of people call it Obamacare. But since the Affordable Care Act was implemented, what that did is it gave Health and Human Service access to everybody's medical records. And Health and Human Services is watching women's cycles. And when they see that a woman has missed a period, they start focusing their energy and efforts on monitoring that woman to see if there's any exploitable factor in that woman's life to be able to steal a child. And then they are also targeting specific individuals for specific demographics, specific eye colors, hair colors, skin colors, disabilities even. And they're looking for people because they have buyers on the other end who are specifically looking for a certain type of baby. And so these people who are employees and contractors of Health and Human Services are monitoring pregnancies. And then once they get closer to the end, they start laser focusing on the pregnancy. And oftentimes, and this is happening more and more in this country, a child will be born, and a mother who has never even had any interaction with the department as an adult, maybe they did as a child, Maybe they were in foster care as a child, or maybe they have a connected member of the government who is against them and wants to see bad things happen to them or wants their child. Common stories that I hear all the time, because my phone blows up all the time with these stories. But when this happens, these children are stolen away from their parents by the department, and then once they're stolen away from their parents by the department, a way to increase that child's value to the department is to drug them. And so these, again, Health and Human Services steals the child, but then Health and Human Services is also the oversight agency of the Food and Drug Administration. And so the Food and Drug Administration has got people, pharmacists, people who write prescriptions, and pharmacists who distribute these drugs. And what they do is they use these children for medical science. So when I talked before about how children are being used for medical science, they are diagnosing the children that they kidnap instead of recognizing that these are child trauma survivors who have been stolen away from their parents, their families, their friends, their neighborhoods, suddenly without warning. These are human trafficking survivors. These are children who have been put in or being forced to work, sometimes in factories. They're being forced to perform sexual favors for other people to make money off of them. And instead of recognizing that these are trauma survivors and victims of active trauma, what they do is they diagnose these children of having mental illness so they can test out and see what the side effects are of new medications that are being issued and pushed out to the public by pharmaceutical companies. And I was one of those children who was on every new drug as they came out and more drugs as it progressed. And I met so many, hundreds of other children who went through the same thing. Not mention the fact that I talked to parents whose children are in foster care and their children are experiencing the same thing. So when you look at Health and Human Services, Health and Human Services has a vested interest to not only steal your child because they get federal money for doing that, to sell your child because they get additional federal money for doing that through the Adoption and Safe Families Act, another executive order that incentivized the sale of children. And then, but also through the drugs and the diagnoses that doctors put on your child. So they will diagnose your child as being mentally ill when they are simply a victim of the trauma and the theft. They are a kidnapping victim. And they just do experiments on you. I mean, I can't tell you how many drugs I was on. At one point in time, I think I was taking 12 pills a day of varying types. And, this is all by force. They threaten negative consequences against you if you do not take these pills. And getting off of them was a process where a foster parent had to, one, agree, and two, sign a waiver after getting all sorts of feedback about getting me off of these drugs. He ended up, with all the scrutiny and had to sign a waiver, and I went through painful withdrawals. I mean, these drugs they're not light. I was sweating, migraines, shaking, all sorts of terrible side effects to this until I finally was free of them. And 6 months later, go back to the same psychiatrist who says to me, "I'm sorry, there's nothing wrong with you." And this is a situation, these kids, because when you put a child on medication, you give them a diagnosis. Well, now the Health and Human Services can request money from the Social Security Act, and they get Social Security funds for the kids, collect that money. It goes into these coffers, and all these people can continue to get their fat checks and salaries. They continue to get their incentives and bonuses. They have quotas to meet. I mean, these funds that Health and Human Services gets and these state agencies, they're all requesting in advance. They're requesting their money in advance. They have a quota to meet of how many children they have to kidnap and how many children they have to put into adoption, how many children they have to put into foster care. They have quotas to meet. All right. Productivity to them is how many children they can get into foster care and keep into foster care without giving them back to their parents or to their families at all. That is meeting their goals. And so we have to change this entire system and focus. All right, we have to do something about this. It has to end. So instead of my ideas are if we take police officers, instead of having police officers being people who violate our rights so that they can generate revenue and slaves for the states, instead of people who enforce statutes, codes, and ordinances, we need to have police officers to enforce rights, to enforce safety, not to violate rights for the profit of the state. All right, we need these courts to be courts of justice. not courts of injustice. All right, that's where we're going wrong. And we have courts of injustice, and we have this blue wall of silence issue because of this one word. It's immunity. Immunity. No man should ever have any form of immunity, whether implied or actual, for committing a crime against another human being. If you purposefully and maliciously have criminal actions that you commit against the populace or against a person, you should be just as susceptible to a retribution as everyone else. But when you are a member of the Bar Association, a member of the Blue Wall of Silence, or a higher level member of the Democratic Republican Party, then you are living under, whether it is an actual lawful immunity. I mean, there's no lawful immunity, but if you're under any type of actual qualified immunity, or whether you're under a de facto immunity, the fact of the matter is immunity leads to corruption. So if there is nobody who will arrest the crime, you're living as immune, and if you are immune, then it's going to lead to your corruption. So in order to get any type of justice, we need to have rights enforcement. We need to have law enforcement enforcing people's rights, and we need to abolish all forms of immunity. We have to abolish all forms of slavery, and we have to have a system of accountability where people who violate people's rights are held accountable, because we don't have that. The Department of Justice does not arrest crimes of violations of rights, even though it's codified in our laws. 18 U.S.C. 242 is deprivations of rights under color of law. And that is the crime that's being committed by these police officers and judges on a regular basis. They deprive us of our rights under the guise of law. And so when you do that, you violated 18 U.S.C. 242, which is a crime punishment of prison or even death, depending on the circumstances. The same goes for 18 U.S.C. 241, conspiracy against rights. 18 U.S.C. 241, conspiracy against rights. When people hear that word conspiracy, they start automatically thinking about some far-fetched, idea, or something that's false that people are trying to claim to be true, or something that can't be proven. But by the definition of conspiracy in our federal law books, all it means is two people work together, two or more people work together to violate your rights. So if two people work together, say for instance a judge and an attorney, or another litigant and their co-conspirator who committed perjury, in order to violate your rights in some way, they've committed a violation of 18 U.S.C. 241. And there are a whole list of other laws under 18 United States Code that are violated in these courts. Fraud laws. There's all sorts of things. You can find them if you go searching and start going down those rabbit holes. But when you call a police officer and you say, hey, this guy has violated my rights under color of law, violated 18 U.S.C. 242, there is it's a codified crime. It has a prison sentence. I need you to arrest it. They don't arrest the crime. When you call the FBI and do the same thing, they don't arrest the crime. If you call the U.S. Marshals, they won't arrest the crime. If you call the state law enforcement agencies, they won't arrest the crime, because nobody is enforcing the laws that protect the people. The only laws that are enforced are the ones that protect the government officials, the ones that profit the government officials, that profit these actors who are pretending to be public servants but are actually public fakers. So they faked their oaths. They take these oaths that they are going to defend us against enemies, foreign and domestic. They take these oaths that they're going to uphold the constitutions of the United States. But what they don't, they're liars. They've committed perjury, aggravated perjury under color of law. And these are codified crimes that if we had any type of law enforcement in this country would be arrested, but they're not, because we don't. And when we the people all recognize that our enemies are the Democratic and Republican Party, the Blue Wall of Silence, and the Bar Association, and those factions are also working with state agencies, the medical associations, and with other private corporate interests, and when you see that all of those factions are conspired against us and our rights and our freedoms so that they can all profit off of our suffering, and when we all recognize that as a people and we say, no, we don't consent to that, we've had enough, we're not going to play your game anymore, that's when we can all come together, rise up against this, and take this country back from its tyranny. But no amount of compliance is ever going to end tyranny.
No, it continues your slavery, really, is what it does, and that's why I always kind of tell people whatever they're telling you to do the opposite. Like, you have to understand who we're dealing with here, because I was assaulted by a sheriff and or arrested just for going to a public meeting and speaking. And anytime I would talk to them about 18 USC 241, 242, even 245, because they have a badge, they have the right and the duty to go and arrest these people for doing that to our rights. And they would say, no, we just deal with penal codes. And I'm like, no, you're ignorant, because they also keep them ignorant, many of them, to what their authority is, so that they think, oh, no, I don't deal with federal statutes. That's for somebody else. I've gone to the U.S. Marshals to do that. I've gone to many different, like the Department of Homeland Security police that came to when I was at a Social Security office, and they threw me to the ground and arrested me for not wearing a mask. And anytime I've mentioned it to them, it's like they just kind of want to, oh, that's not something that, and they should know that it is. And if you're right, if we did have the right law enforcement and people and individuals who understood this, then they would be going, because I'm like, your rights are being violated too. Like, you don't even understand that it's happening to you as well. And you have the authority to do something about it, but you're taking a step back. And I don't understand that. And then they'll tell me, well, I'm just following the rules and all this. And I'm like, rules schmools. Like, that is bull crap, that you're sitting here and using that as a guise to like act like you have no authority, that there's nobody that's going to help. Because even being assaulted by the sheriff, it's like, so I'm going to the sheriff to investigate it. What's going to happen there? They exonerated him. And it's like, you can't go to the perpetrators and expect them to go after themselves. That's why they've set all of these systems in place, like you're saying, with the immunity, to basically free them from any obligation or what's the word I'm looking for? Responsibility of their actions. And we have to understand that. I mean, and one thing I wanted to say too, that's kind of not out of this realm, but do you find that more people who were in foster care are having their children taken?
Actually, it's funny you say that. After my last podcast that I did, I started getting calls coming in, and it happens every time I start doing a podcast. And I'm going to give my number out: 904-325-2545. My phone is always on, so if there's any way I can help. But my phone started blowing up after the last podcast, and I had 4 mothers in a row, 4 consecutive mothers, and this is not an exaggeration, who called me up. And they didn't lead with this, but after some questioning and reasoning, I found out that all 4 of these mothers whose children were stolen were also in foster care. Every single one. And so this is what you recognize. This isn't just slavery. This is generational slavery.
Right.
So you go into foster care. You come out of foster care. Your child will either be taken into foster care or will be given to the other parent in a court. And DCF workers will come in and testify against you, like they did to me, where they will testify that you were in foster care, that you were verified abused, and for that reason you shouldn't have your child. And that strips away a parent of their ability to be able to keep their child and protect it, period. You can't protect your child, you can't influence your child, you can't raise your child, you can't, raise them up in your belief systems, total violation of your reproductive rights. I didn't have children so that somebody else could have my children. Right. So, so that said, they violate all manner of rights in order to do it. And I can't take it anymore. Honestly, I can't take it anymore. The whole system, it creates this generational slavery where, my dad wasn't in my life. He was a weekender. He got every other weekend, that situation. So I didn't have my dad in my life. He didn't have his dad in his life. His mom took off with him when he was 7 years old and took him to a different state. And the courts did not, do anything about it. So he grew up without his dad. My grandfather actually grew up without his dad. His dad died when he was like 7 years old. And then my children, they grew up without their dad. So you can see generationally, children, my grandfather, my dad, me, and my children have all generationally had to grow up without a father because of mostly actions of the judiciary. And then, so you can see that even if you weren't in foster care and you end up being one of those victims of Title 4D, where they use the child support program to delete you from your child's life for financial gain. Well, once they've removed you from your child's life, now your child is going to be growing up without a parent, without knowledge of the situation, without education on their rights, and they're going to end up in the same situation. Their children are going to be taken too. It's a cycle that happens generationally, because these families, these judges, these attorneys, they profit off of this generationally. You know, the son of a lawyer, the son of a judge, goes to law school.
Yeah.
The son of a doctor goes to medical school. It's the way they do it, because they know that they're part of an exclusive club of 0.5% of the population or less. And that 0.5% of the population gets to benefit off of the labor of the rest of the population. You know, they get that exclusivity. They get to have the mega yachts and the big fancy mansions. They get to have the fancy, you know, motor coach RVs that they pay, you know, $500,000 for, sitting in their driveway. They get the brand new Mercedes every year. They get all those things off of the suffering of us.
Right.
Well, we have to come together. If we're going to see any, like, we know the problem, but if we want a solution, we're going to have to come together. And we're going to have to come together in a few ways. We're going to have to say, no, we refuse to comply anymore. We have to become ungovernable. That is one way. We have to become ungovernable. And then two, we have to all come together in unity, and the notion that we do not consent to be slaves. We do not support slavery in any form, and that we intend on ending it.
Yes.
And so when we come together with that intention, and then the next part is that we have to put people in the positions of power to be able to effectuate the change necessary. So we have to find people with integrity who are ultimately goal-based on the same goals as us, which, before we can work on anything else, we have got to work on the slavery aspect. We have got to end slavery, because with slavery, that means that we don't have freedom. And with slavery, that means we don't have rights. If we're slaves, we are people without property, rights, or freedom. So we have got to address the slavery aspect first, so that we can work on the other issues. And so we need to get people with integrity in the positions of power to effectuate the change necessary to end slavery and save the child victims of trafficking and the United States of America. And once we do that, and we put those people into those positions to be able to effectuate that necessary change, and we start implementing that change, we start creating policies that enforce our rights instead of violating them, abolishing slavery in all forms officially within our government. When we put people in that executive position of power, we put a president there with integrity who will abolish all of these previous acts that were unconstitutional and that violated people's rights for the profit of a corporation or for a select group. And we remove all of these unlawful policies that have been implemented, and we can start to see the change. But like I said before about the blue wall of silence and turning these police officers from statute, code, and ordinance enforcers, policy enforcers, into rights enforcers,
right,
that in itself, just that one minor change would drastically change the way our government interacts with us. Just that one little change would be the start of a snowball effect of enforcing rights instead of violating them, and of people, instead of being, like in these situations of foster care, oftentimes, again, there are many, many situations, and I'm gonna speak for you all real quickly, who did nothing wrong in the first place and whose children were stolen. So there are many, 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 many situations where a child was wrongfully removed, or the child was never in danger. Oftentimes these kids don't even know why they were taken. All right. And those many, many cases. And even in those other cases, though, where there was a situation where a parent was addicted to drugs, or had, some sort of tendencies that were unsafe, or had, they were in a situation of poverty and didn't have everything that modern America believes is necessary for life. You have, though, even in those situations, instead of taking advantage of that family, instead of exploiting a family in need, we need to be providing the services necessary for that family to be able to stay together. And removals should be a last resort. And at a first priority for any removal should be to put that child with a safe family member.
Yeah.
And that is not the situation or the policy. And the reason why is because the people who are in charge of those decisions are bar association members, and bar association members ultimately know that if they can destroy, if they can mess up a child, that they will ultimately benefit from that. The bar association and subsequent members who touch that family are going to benefit off of that suffering. That profitability has got to be removed. So, but we can do all this. I mean, it sounds like it's, like, oh, this is too much. It's more than we could ever do, but it's not. If we just take a person with integrity, you can take a person like me, and there's other people out there, human rights advocates, people who advocate for human rights, people who advocate for our sustainability of life on this planet, because we keep putting people without integrity in. If you believe the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, then you believe that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are the best bet for America.
Right.
And we all know that that is just so far from the truth. There's no way around it. They are not the two best and brightest human beings in the United States. We have better, brighter people, and people who are more willing. We've also got well over 1,000 presidential candidates running, but you only hear about 2 of them. And that's part of that great deception, because the Democratic Party and the Republican Party own the media companies that feed you the bullshit media lies that you listen to and believe. These lies that these 2 people are the only 2 presidential candidates in the country. The fact that these 2 are the only people who could ever possibly win. That the Democratic and Republican parties are the only options that you have. That Kamala Harris is not a slaver who is looking out for the interest of the Bar Association, and who isn't going to implement policies that benefit the Bar Association at first opportunity. And like Donald Trump isn't a career actor and a career real estate mogul who is going to implement policies that benefit the elitist class at our expense. We know that these things are fact. We look at who these people are. They are not like us. These people do not know what a gallon of milk costs. These people do not drive themselves around. These people are not like us. They were not raised like us. They did not live like us. They do not represent our interests. And they are not people who you should pick to be in any position of power. And that doesn't just go for Donald Trump and Kamala. That goes for the entire Democratic and Republican Party. We know that for years, centuries, that these people who are in these positions of power within these private organizations have been working together and against us.
Right.
And just knowing that should be enough. Stop claiming to be a Democrat. Stop claiming to be a Republican. Stop claiming to be a proud American, because nobody should be proud of the fact that 1.8 million people are incarcerated. Most of them have not had a jury trial. Most of them were not indicted by a grand jury. And both of those things violate the Constitution and the protections of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So those situations alone should be enough for you to recognize that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are working against us. If you don't recognize it, if you don't know it, I'll put my phone number out there. Call me and I'll explain exactly how the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have been working to hurt you personally. Okay,
Exactly.
These things are happening. The child trafficking is happening in Republican states as much as it's happening in Democrat states. And these children are being stolen away from their parents, like you were talking about before, for the purposes of sexual sterilization.
Mm-hmm.
This sexual sterilization thing is totally real. There are people who tell you that it's fake news. If you look online, if you search Xavier Becerra, Becerra is the current director of Health and Human Services of the United States of America. And there are videos where people are actively asking him about stealing children away from their parents, putting them in foster care so they can be medically transitioned at the expense of the taxpayers.
Right.
Okay, this is something he would not even comment on a minimum age. A 4-year-old, they'll steal a 4-year-old to turn them from a boy to a girl or a girl to a boy. They'll steal it. It doesn't matter how old they are. They will steal your child from you so that they can perform medical experiments on them, so that they can sterilize them permanently, because they have a massive scheme to try and depopulate all of us. The depopulation, they realize that they only amount to a point a percentage of the population, the collectively. And altogether, all it would take is just like today, we could all say, no, we've had enough. We could all stop paying bills, stop paying taxes, stop going to work, stop feeding into this system of slavery. And we could demand swift action and the step down of all members of the Democratic or Republican Party in our government. We could do that as a people, and one day we could take this country back.
Right.
But it would just take unity. That's all it takes. We have to set aside any conflicts based off of culture, the fake race. We are only one race. We are all humans. It doesn't matter what color your skin is or what your continent of origin is. We all are human beings, and we can all interbreed, which means we are the same species. So the human race, and for the sake of the human race, if even one person, no matter what color, is enslaved, the human race has got an issue that needs to be resolved. So we need to come together, and we need to save our children in the United States from trafficking. We need to end our slavery in the United States. And then we need to expand those efforts worldwide so that we can end slavery and end child trafficking throughout the entire world, because it is as absolutely anti-freedom. It is anti-humanity. And the fact that it's being perpetrated by both major political parties in this country, and we the people are not completely outraged and continue to support these two parties, and continue to support these factions that are completely vested in the enslavement of us. It's just an injustice to humanity as a whole. We are going to see end of times if we do not stand up and fight back against this.
That's right. Well, and that's the thing, like unity is the most important thing. And it's all because right now they're having us hate each other. And in that, we're not paying attention to them. And it's like we have Stockholm syndrome, where we're just like, oh my gosh, no, they're okay. They're good. They're here to help. And everything they offer is good. No, we have to understand, quit looking at each other like we're the problem. We have to look at where the source is coming from and who wants us to be in a constant state of chaos and discord and not being united. And I think, that's been my goal from like the get-go, to just really want people to put that aside, understand who's doing this to us. And the way to fight back is by uniting, because they're the most terrified of us. That's why they have to keep us divided, because we are so powerful. If we all could unite like that and stand against this, they wouldn't even have anything to do, because we are the ones that fund it. We're the ones that give them everything that they need. We have to start participating in these atrocities just because we think it's easier, because at the end of the day, it isn't. And
it's been our absolute lack of interest in our government because of its corruption that has ultimately led to the corruption becoming absolute. It's through and through. It used to be, in some places, the corruption is there's a normal amount of corruption. There's always corruption, right? Everybody's like, oh, there's always corruption in government. But in the United States, we're dealing with absolute corruption. It's through and through, all the way through. Every single facet and of our government is corrupted. And once we get to that point, there is no turning back. They want us all fighting each other. They turn us against each other so that we don't turn against them. So we don't recognize who the real problem is and who the real enemy is. But we all have the same common enemy. No matter what your background, our common enemy is the same. No matter what your story, our common enemy is the same. And that enemy is whatever it is that allows people to commit crimes against us without any consequence. And whoever tries to divide us, whoever and why ever anybody tries to divide us, that's the enemy. We know this. So we have to put aside all the differences. We have to recognize the truth of our oppression. We have to recognize that we do not want our children to be slaves. We have to come together in unity on something. We need to find somebody who has integrity and honesty, and who's willing, who's fearless, and who will, step up and represent the people. And we need to find all of those people who fit that, all of those people with integrity, all of those people who have honesty and a willingness to see an end to slavery and want to see the children safe. And we need to gather up those people, and we need to support those people, and we need to help them get into those positions of power to effectuate the necessary change we've got to. So we, the people, have got to unite. We have to unite. As a person fighting up against a sovereign government, you are absolutely powerless. You are weak. You cannot beat a sovereign government. You cannot beat a going into a courtroom that is a crime scene where their entire goal is to have you follow their policies, have you follow their rules while they break them so that they can enslave you. You're not going to come out with a positive outcome that way. But if you want a positive outcome, we can effectuate that change if we all come together as a people. And instead of fighting these as individuals going up against a sovereign government, we fight together as a people going up against a tyrannical governmental system, an absolute treasonous and tyrannical system that is in the business of enslaving us. And so as a people, we come together and we're an unstoppable force. We are literally the bullet necessary in order to take out the engine of this madness. And we can beat this. We can beat them as a people in unity, but we can never ever beat them as individuals. It's too much for one person, and
right.
but it's not too much for us as a people. We all have to come together. We have got to please come together. Please, the children of the United States of America who are currently being enslaved, currently being raped as I speak, currently being stolen away and ripped away from their parents. You should see some of these videos of these where they hostily strip these children away from their parents, with children in tears, crying and screaming because they're being taken away from mommy and daddy. It is the most disgusting thing that I have ever seen. And for anybody to say that they are supportive of the police, and then and to know that police are stealing children away from their parents, anybody to say that they support the blue line when that blue line is also affiliated with the blue shield and the blue wall of silence that allows officers to be able to commit crimes, including murder and rape, and get away with it. You're on the wrong side of this if you support that.
Well, I mean, this has been a plethora of information, whatever. But I'm so encouraged by, you just speaking out, by you sharing all of this, and unity is definitely the one main thing that we need to do. And it's beyond powerful. It's beyond all the, anything else that we can do. And so what are some parting words, and is there any help people can give you? That I don't know if you have like a Give, Send, Go, or how can people support you?
Well, as it stands right now, I'm working on getting some donation platforms together, and it's been an ongoing battle to get everything set up. And the reason why is because I'm just one person doing a lot of this work by myself, and I'm also consistently taking calls and messages from parents and child victims of these situations. So getting everything together, we do need hands on deck. We need volunteers, people who are have the skills necessary to perform different things. We're building a board of directors, and so we'll have some board of directors meetings coming up. And anybody who's local, who's got some skills involved, or who knows their way around, or knows about what's going on in the state, I encourage you, please get in touch with me. Also, as far as donations go, if you've got Cash App, I set up a Cash App for this cause. It's We the People Advocates, a money sign, We the People Advocates. If you want to send any type of donations our way to help us with these efforts. We are a 501c4 registered nonprofit in the state of California. And that means that we can work on social justice issues. We can work on the big picture issues and trying to end slavery and get the right people into the right positions of power to be able to effectuate that change. You're also going to be seeing a lot of me. I'm new here to California. I'm new to San Diego County, but you're going to be seeing a lot of me because I'm going to be attending these board meetings and these community meetings with our commissioners and with our city councils throughout.
Good.
I'm also going to be running for local office at the first possible opportunity. I'm not sure which, but the fact is I encourage all of you, if you have integrity, if you are honest and you want to see an end, I want to see you on these elections, on these ballots. I want to see your name on that ballot, and I want to see you supporting those people who are not Democrats and not Republicans, who want to see an end to the slavery and want to see children safe in this world. Please support those people and support We the People Advocates in whatever way, shape, or form you can. My phone's always on, and if you have the means or ability to make a donation of even $5, every little bit helps in the cost of trying to effectuate an end to slavery and child trafficking in the United States.
Christopher, thank you so much. I look forward to you have to come back on my show some other time, because this is just really important. And I think it's something that is really kind of coming out into the light right now. A lot of people are wanting to talk about it, which is really good. And I think the more that we do, the more people that we can bring along this journey and get them to unite with everybody. Because I think that children and slavery, like that should be something that's on everybody's concerned, on their mind as a concern, and not something that anybody would want to perpetuate unless you're one of these nefarious actors that are the ones that are engaged in it. So I'm just so thankful for you, and I'm sorry for what you've been through, what you're going through with your children. And I'll just continue to pray that, the Lord can open a door and things can be changed there as well. So God bless you, and definitely come back again. And so thank you guys for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that and got some information that you may not have been privy to. Please reach out to Christopher if you can help, if you would like to donate, and just kind of join this movement, I would say. And so join me next time where I bring you more truth, love, light, and all of the good things. God bless everybody. Take care.
Thank you.